I have long believed that really intentionally painting your shadows is one way to quickly elevate your paintings. I've always loved painting with direct sunlight, whether it's landscapes, portraits, certainly still lifes. And part of why I like this is because just by really focusing on quality of your shadow, the edge of the shadow, and certainly the chroma, the color of the shadow, is one way to really elevate your paintings. I see this all the time as an art instructor and teacher, especially in person, is that someone will spend so much time painting a vase, a flower, a fruit, whatever it is. And then they almost treat the shadow like an afterthought. They sort of smudge gray or brown underneath it and kind of hope for the best. But that couldn't be sort of further from how you should think about shadow, especially in the case that the shadow casts a really sharp or very present shadow, like it takes up a lot of visual space, right? Sometimes things are photographed or painted in ambient light and the shadow is really, really barely visible. It sort of just helps a little bit describe form. And sometimes the shadow is as dominant and visually present as the object itself. And just because we can't pick up a shadow or you can't bump into a shadow, our brain, especially when we're first learning to paint, will often sort of forget to really address the shadow in the same way that we do the objects. And that is really the lesson, the meat behind this chapter. It's called A New Light on Shadows. And unlike the rest of the book, which happens based on a setup that you set up in a little light box, I'll insert some images here. Most of the book is in that particular setting. This one, we go outside to take our references. And it's also a little bit of a novelty chapter in that we are painting two paintings. I will say this is where instructor, art educator, full-time professional artist Sari is going to deviate from the book slightly, and that I chose to paint a slightly different subject matter. There were some logistical issues, meaning that for the first time in Texas, when I was filming this, it felt like there was never a sunny day when I was available. So I had to go deep in the archives. And like I said, I paint a lot of direct light. So I had plenty of images to choose from, and I chose these little mini bananas and lemons. So we kind of have a similar spirit. It's a little actually more, I think, complicated than what he's asking. He's asking us to paint a grapefruit and an orange. So a yellow fleshed citrus and then an orange fleshed citrus, and look at the chroma of the shadows. And I will say that there's two major observations that one should make here. So presumably, if you're watching this on YouTube, you might just be watching these and learning the tips. In my online art school, we are painting all of these together. And so there's a little bit more of a hands-on feel. But if you are watching this, and you can glean a lot just from someone talking about the process, I would say there's two things I would flag here. The first is that within one shadow of an object that is seemingly the same color, in this case, the banana and the lemons, there is a core shadow that's going to have a slightly different chroma than the outer parts of that shadow, right? When we think of this, we often call it the cast shadow. There's the shadow on the form, and then there's the shadow being cast by the object blocking the direct sunlight. And the way that I've depicted this is in the core of my shadow, there's a little more warmth. The flesh of the banana is a yellow, almost a orangey yellow. It's a very warm yellow, like a cad medium type yellow. And we can see where the yellow flesh is being bounced more directly, there's almost more of a purple or a red. The red is influencing the bluish color of the shadow and pulling it slightly more towards that purple. One thing that is, I think, true and correct about painting shadow is that usually the shadow is going to be less chromatic than the form itself. And that's simply because of the physics. No one ever tells you when you sign up to be an artist that you're a little bit playing with physics every single time you paint, whether you know it or not. But specifically what's happening is when there is less light hitting the object and bouncing into your eye or the camera or both, then the color can't be as vibrant. One way I sort of metabolize this in my paintings is that my most chromatic, most vibrant part of my composition is usually near the highlight or like on the plane of my surface that's the brightest. And then conversely, our shadow is going to be less chromatic because there's less light bouncing off. But that doesn't mean that you then just default to gray. I think this is partly because people are correctly clocking that if the value of how light or how dark it is correct, that's most of the work. But you're missing an opportunity to have your painting seem more colorful and more vibrant and more lifelike and balanced by not looking into the chroma. So like I mentioned, you have the chroma of the outside of the shadow is maybe more of a blue where it pulls warmer, aka more purple at the core of the shadow. There might also be a shift in value. Sometimes it's really obvious and sometimes it's not. Again, it kind of depends on the quality of the light. And then more specific to what Arthur Stern is trying to show us in this book, his grapefruit is very yellow in flesh, meaning that the shadow has a blue, almost a cyan quality to it, whereas the shadow of the orange takes on more of a violet. And that's because there's kind of like color light physics sort of happening. That is to say that the shadow is reading kind of cool, ambiguously cool, we'll say. And so it could be any shade of sort of green through cool red, and more muted, but which direction in that cool spectrum it pulls really depends on the color of the object. So the orange is going to pull that shadow closer to the red side, where the yellow of the grapefruit or the yellow citrus is going to pull it more towards that cyan and almost green even side. And so it can feel like splitting hairs a little bit, especially because so much of this book up until this point, and certainly so much of my own teaching, says pay attention to value, pay attention to value. But assuming that you have a good understanding of value, you know to check it, you know how to pull the chroma down in your reference photo and check your values, use your heart glasses, whatever. Assuming that you have that down, finding the specific hue and chroma and intensity of that color is going to be the thing that pushes that good sense of value into someone who really has mastery of color and form in their paintings. And the cool thing about this in this chapter is that this is perhaps the most simple part of the entire book, the most simple composition. Arthur Stern really just has us looking at the cast shadow, the white surface, and then the lit and shadow side of the object. So very, 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 very simple. And yet, just by paying attention to the chroma and understanding which direction the color pulls, we can develop our understanding of shadow and really take those lessons into the following chapters. And the last thing I'll say about color, light, shadow, cast shadow, chroma, etc., that actually straddles the project that I'm doing with this book, where every other week throughout the year, this year, I'm doing a project out of this book, also has to do with a course that I just published for Not Sorry Art School, and that is Applied Color Theory. And this course is basically set up to help students understand the foundational building blocks of color theory through these really bite-sized exercises. And while I'm proud of this course and I want you to know about it, it's actually the last section, so it's a 3-part section of that course that ties directly into this conversation, and that is understanding the relationship between the temperature or even color of the light and the shadow. And so one thing you'll see a lot in, let's say, like Pixar movies, they're kind of the masters of this. It's probably because they hire a lot of like true fine artist painters to work. Not that animation isn't true fine art, but people who are sort of trained in sort of this impressionistic direct painting lineage into their production company, is because they have a really good understanding that if the light is warm, so think Kelvins, right? Light can be very cool. Think fluorescent light or midday light is kind of cool to neutral. And then once you get to golden hour, as the name would allude to, it becomes more warm and more yellow. And when you have that yellowy, warm, veering on orange kind of light, there is a dance that happens between the color of the shadow. And that is that when you have a color wheel, if your light is somewhere between yellow and orange, your shadow is going to read and be perceived as whatever color is directly opposite on the color wheel. And so that tends to be a blue color, like an ultramarine color. And so if you think, why are people always painting the shadows blue? When I look at this, I don't see a blue shadow. I think there's a little bit of, you do train your eye and you do start to pick up on the subtle chroma. That's my opinion. But also, there is a relationship. I show this in the course not just by pointing this out, as I have in my other courses as well, but we actually go through and cast a magenta light on white objects. And what we notice is that if our light is magenta, then the relationship color of the shadow is the opposite, which is green. And this happens with all of the colors. I provide these references and walk through this phenomenon as I do a demo and then set up the students to do their own exercises. So if that sounds interesting, please check out the course. I made it accessible, but also packed full of information. All this to say, painting something in direct natural sunlight is one really cool, often free way to sort of look at the color dynamic between lit and shadow forms. If you don't have an elaborate fine art still life setup, don't worry, you don't need it. Part of why I started painting these sort of aerialized still lifes many, many moons ago was because, truthfully, my studio was just like a corner of a spare bedroom that didn't have great light, and I had a porch, and that's what I used to set up my still lifes. It was kind of born out of necessity, but now it's spammed all over Pinterest, and it's very much a thing, and it's just like we all, aerialized is nothing new, but this sort of thing I did out of necessity sort of created its own little subgenre on Pinterest. But also, it's what happens when you paint every single day for like 10 years. Anyways, if this has been interesting and you're still here and you're like, Sari, I want to learn more, I want to go more in depth, please check out Not Sorry Art School. It is an online art school that I built and have been adding to for 5 years now. It'll be 5 years exactly in this August. And we have 17 courses and counting. Like I said, we just added applied color theory. I also go live every other week and do the painting with my students live. They ask questions. Today, I just finished filming this, how to paint metallic, and we talked a lot about residencies because I'm in a residency right now. So it's everything from learning to paint / just questions you've always wanted to ask a working artist. It's a very cool group. There's an online community, like I said, 17 courses and counting, and it's something I'm very proud of and I know will help you become the painter that you want to be. It's such a fun community and something that I know will take you to the next level. I designed it to be very thorough. It is not just a how to paint like this one painter. It's really developed to help you find your personal style and make you the best painter that you can be. If that sounds interesting, check out the promo code. You can use this at checkout in order to get a discount on that lifetime membership. That's how you get access to the community and to the lives every other week. Thank you so much for being here. And as always, I'll see you in the next video.